400 aircraft launched into the Pacific sky. Only a handful returned. What happened on June 19, 1944, wasn't just a battle, it was an execution. A clash so one-sided it rewrote the rules of aerial warfare forever. Most people know about Pearl Harbor, Midway, and the atomic bombs. But almost no one knows about the day America annihilated Japan's air power in mere hours. This is that story. The Mitsubishi A6M0 arrived over Oahu like a mechanical god. Sleek, impossibly agile, faster than anything America had in the air. As Japanese fighters swept across Pearl Harbor's burning sky, American pilots who survived the attack shared the same horrified realization: they had nothing that could match it. The Zero could outturn, outclimb, and outrun every fighter in the United States arsenal. At Wake Island, 4 Zeros destroyed 8 American Wildcats without a single loss. In the Philippines, experienced American pilots were shot down by the dozens. Over the Coral Sea and at Guadalcanal, the Zero carved its legend in blood and fire. For young Navy pilot Ensign David McCampbell, his first encounter with a Zero in early 1942 was a lesson in humility. Flying a stubby F-4F Wildcat off the carrier Enterprise, he watched a Zero dance around his squadron like they were standing still. "I fired every round I had," McCampbell would later recall. "Didn't touch him. He could have killed me 10 times over, but I think he ran out of ammunition. I limped back to the carrier knowing one thing: we were flying coffins." The early Pacific War was a nightmare for American naval aviation. The Zero seemed invincible. Its lightweight construction gave it a phenomenal power-to-weight ratio. Its large wings provided incredible maneuverability. Japanese pilots, many with years of combat experience from China, were the finest in the world. American losses mounted week after week. Pilots with barely 50 hours of training were thrown into combat and slaughtered. The kill ratios were devastating, sometimes 5 or 6 American aircraft lost for every Zero destroyed. Something had to change. Grumman Aircraft Corporation, Bethpage, New York, 1942. Engineers at Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation listened carefully to the pilots who returned from the Pacific. Every combat report was studied. Every loss was analyzed. Every weakness in the Wildcat was documented. The design philosophy for their new fighter was radical: stop trying to outturn the Zero. Instead, build a fighter that could outpower it, outdive it, and, most importantly, bring its pilot home alive. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat was born from this philosophy. It was not elegant. It was not a dancer. It was a brawler, a flying tank with teeth. The specifications were impressive. 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine, 6.50 caliber machine guns in the wings, heavy armor plating around the cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, reinforced airframe that could absorb punishment. Where the Zero sacrificed protection for performance, the Hellcat sacrificed nothing. It was fast, 391 miles per hour in level flight. It could climb to 20,000 feet in less than 8 minutes. And it could dive at speeds the Zero couldn't match without tearing itself apart. But the real genius was in its simplicity. The Hellcat was easy to fly. A pilot fresh out of flight school could handle it. The controls were responsive but forgiving. The wide landing gear made carrier landing safer. The visibility from the cockpit was excellent. Most importantly, it could take a beating. Zeros would disintegrate under a burst of heavy machine gun fire, their unarmored fuel tanks would explode, their lightweight frames would shred. The Hellcat could absorb dozens of hits and keep flying. By late 1943, the first Hellcats reached the Pacific Fleet. Pilots who had survived the dark days of 1942 knew immediately, this changed everything. Task Force 58, Philippine Sea, June 18, 1944. By mid-1944, the strategic situation in the Pacific had shifted dramatically. American forces were island-hopping toward Japan. The Marianas Islands, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, were the next targets. Whoever controlled these islands would control the air approaches to the Japanese home islands. Admiral Raymond Spruance commanded the Fifth Fleet. Under him, Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher led Task Force 58, the most powerful naval striking force ever assembled. The numbers were staggering. 15 fleet carriers, 7 battleships, 21 cruisers, 69 destroyers, 956 aircraft, 475 of them Hellcats. Opposing them was the Japanese mobile fleet under Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa. 9 carriers, 5 battleships, 13 cruisers, 28 destroyers, 473 aircraft. On paper, the forces seemed almost balanced. But the reality beneath those numbers told a different story. American pilots averaged over 300 hours of flight training before reaching the fleet. Japanese pilots, their training programs gutted by losses and fuel shortages, often had less than 100 hours, some barely 50. American carriers operated in well-drilled task groups with coordinated fighter direction. Japanese carriers struggled with outdated radar and fragmented communications. And then there were the aircraft themselves. The majority of American fighters were Hellcats. The majority of Japanese fighters were still Zeros, the same basic design from 1940, now facing an opponent specifically built to kill it. On the evening of June 18, Lieutenant David McCampbell, now a commander and leader of Air Group 15 aboard the Essex, briefed his pilots in the ready room. "Intelligence confirms the Japanese fleet is closing from the west," he said, pointing to the chart. "They'll launch at first light. Expect everything they have: fighters, dive bombers, torpedo planes. This will be the largest carrier engagement since Midway." He paused, looking at the faces of his pilots. Some were veterans who'd fought since 1942. Others were fresh from training, flying their first combat mission tomorrow. "Remember your training," McCampbell continued. "The Zero can still outturn us. But we're faster, we're tougher, and we've got altitude. Use it. Boom and zoom, dive, shoot, climb away. Don't get suckered into a turning fight." Lieutenant Roy Rushing, one of McCampbell's wingmen, raised his hand. "Skipper, what if they come in waves?" McCampbell's expression was granite. "Then we'll meet every wave. And we'll break every one." Across the task force, similar briefings took place. 15 carriers prepared their air wings. Mechanics armed aircraft. Radar operators calibrated their screens. Anti-aircraft crews loaded their guns. The Pacific night was calm, almost serene. Stars glittered above the darkened fleet. But every man knew, tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the sky would burn. June 19, 1944, 0730 hours. The Combat Information Center aboard the Lexington was a dim cave of glowing radar screens and hushed voices. At 0730 hours, a radar operator leaned forward, staring at his scope. "Contact bearing 260 degrees, range 150 miles. Multiple bogeys. Estimate. Jesus, estimate 80+ aircraft." Admiral Mitcher stood behind him, calm as stone. "Launch the fighters. All available Hellcats. Vector them to intercept." Across Task Force 58, the alarm klaxon sounded. Pilots sprinted to their aircraft. Engines roared to life. Deck crews scrambled. On the Essex, Commander McCampbell strapped into his Hellcat. The fighter felt solid beneath him, powerful, ready. He ran through his checks with practiced precision: fuel, ammunition, instruments, radio. "Air Group 15, this is McCampbell. Check in." One by one, his pilots acknowledged. 12 Hellcats, engines thundering, waiting for launch. The catapult officer gave the signal. McCampbell pushed the throttle forward. The deck rushed beneath him, then vanished. The Hellcat leaped into the morning sky, climbing steadily. Within 20 minutes, over 220 American fighters were airborne, a massive combat air patrol stacked from 10,000 to 25,000 feet. The trap was set. At 1036 hours, the first Japanese formation appeared on the horizon. Lieutenant J.G. Alex Vrashu, flying from the Lexington, saw them first. Tally ho! Bandits, Angels 12, heading 090. What Vrashu saw was a ragged formation of about 70 aircraft, Zeros, Judy dive bombers, and Jill torpedo planes. They flew in loose groups, some formations already breaking apart. McCampbell's voice cut across the radio, steady and commanding. All units, this is McCampbell. Engage at will. Remember, boom and zoom. Let's go to work. The Hellcats Dove. 1040 hours, first wave. The engagement began at 23,000 feet. McCampbell led his division down in a slashing attack, diving at nearly 400 miles per hour. The Japanese formation never saw them coming. McCampbell selected a Judy dive bomber, centered it in his gun sight, and pressed the trigger. 6 heavy machine guns erupted. Tracers walked across the bomber's fuselage. Fire blossomed. The Judy rolled over and fell, trailing smoke. Splash 1, McCampbell called calmly. All around him, the sky erupted into chaos. Hellcats slashed through the Japanese formation like sharks through a school of fish. The boom and zoom tactic was devastatingly effective: dive from altitude, fire a burst, then use superior speed to climb back up before the Zeros could respond. Lieutenant Vrashu found himself in perfect position above a formation of Judy dive bombers. He dove, fired, splash 1. Climbed, repositioned, dove again, splash 2. And again. And again. In the span of 8 minutes, Alex Vrashu shot down 6 Japanese aircraft. I simply couldn't miss, he would later say. They were flying straight and level, no evasive action. It was like target practice. But not every engagement was easy. Some Japanese pilots were veterans, skilled, aggressive, dangerous. Lieutenant Roy Rushing found himself pursued by a Zero whose pilot clearly knew his aircraft. The Zero stuck to Rushing's tail, firing in short bursts. Rounds pinged off the Hellcat's armor. Rushing threw his fighter into a hard dive, pushing the throttle to the firewall. The Hellcat accelerated rapidly, 350 miles per hour, 380, 400. The Zero, with its lighter construction, couldn't keep up without risking structural failure. At 5,000 feet, Rushing pulled hard into a climbing turn. The Hellcat's powerful engine hauled him upward. The Zero tried to follow but fell behind, losing energy. Rushing reversed, came around in a high yo-yo maneuver, and dropped in behind the Zero. One burst. The Zero's wings separated. The aircraft tumbled into the sea. The first Japanese wave lasted barely 30 minutes. Of approximately 69 aircraft that attacked, only a handful survived to reach the American fleet, and none made it through the wall of anti-aircraft fire to score hits. American losses, 1 Hellcat damaged. Japanese losses, nearly 45 aircraft destroyed. But the battle was just beginning. 1,130 hours, second wave. The radar screens lit up again. Another massive formation approaching from the west, over 100 aircraft this time. Fresh Hellcat divisions launched from the carriers. Those already airborne climbed back to altitude, reformed, and prepared to engage again. The Americans had a critical advantage: proximity to their carriers allowed for rapid rearming and refueling. Japanese aircraft, flying from carriers 300 miles away, had no such luxury. The second wave was larger but no better coordinated. McCampbell, back at 20,000 feet after a quick rearm, watched the approaching formation with clinical detachment. "They're all over the sky," his wingman observed. No formation discipline at all. It was true. The Japanese aircraft flew in loose, ragged groups. Some pilots were clearly inexperienced, wavering in their course, unable to maintain formation. "Doesn't matter," McCampbell replied. "We treat them all the same. Attack." The slaughter resumed. Hellcats dove from every angle. The superior American fighter direction, coordinated by radar controllers who could see the entire battle, allowed divisions to attack in sequence, always from an advantageous position. Japanese pilots found themselves constantly defensive, unable to organize, picked apart piece by piece. Ensign Wendell Twelves, a rookie pilot on his first combat mission, was vectored toward a group of torpedo bombers. His hands were shaking as he dove, but his training took over. He centered the lead bomber in his gun sight, fired, and watched it explode. "I got one." 12 shouted, voice cracking with adrenaline. "Good kill, 12s," his section leader replied. "Now get back up to altitude. Don't admire your work." Of the 109 aircraft in the second Japanese wave, approximately 70 were destroyed before reaching the fleet. Those that survived faced murderous anti-aircraft fire from the battleships and cruisers. One American battleship gunner later recalled, "They kept coming, even after we'd blown half of them apart. Brave bastards. Stupid, but brave." By 1300 hours, the second wave was annihilated. 1300 hours, third wave. The third wave was smaller, 47 aircraft, but included some of Japan's remaining veteran pilots. They attempted a coordinated strike, with fighters screening the bombers. It didn't matter. American fighter direction vectored 3 full divisions of Hellcats to intercept. The Japanese fighters were swept aside. The bombers that followed were torn apart. Lieutenant J.G. Harris Mitchell, flying from the Bunker Hill, found himself in a rare turning fight with a skilled Zero pilot. The Zero tried every trick, snap rolls, vertical reversals, tight spirals. But Mitchell remembered his training: don't try to out-turn him, out-energy him. Mitchell extended away, climbing, forcing the Zero to follow. At 15,000 feet, the Zero's climb rate faltered. Mitchell reversed, dove, and fired from dead astern. The Zero disintegrated. By 1445 hours, the third wave was destroyed. Of 47 aircraft, only a handful escaped. 1500 hours, fourth wave. The final wave was a desperate gamble, 82 aircraft, including some obsolete types pulled from training units. Japan was throwing everything it had left. The Hellcats met them 60 miles from the fleet. By now, American pilots were rotating through rapid rearm cycles. Some were on their third or fourth sortie of the day. The kill counts were becoming almost surreal. Commander McCampbell, back in the air after refueling, shot down 2 more aircraft, bringing his total for the day to 7. Lieutenant Vrashu's count stood at 6. Across the task force, dozens of pilots were claiming multiple kills. The fourth wave never had a chance. Torn apart by overwhelming numbers, superior tactics, and battle-hardened pilots flying superior aircraft, the Japanese formation disintegrated. By 1530 hours, it was over. Evening, June 19, 1944. As the sun set over the Philippine Sea, the full scale of the catastrophe became clear. American intelligence officers tallied the results. Japanese aircraft destroyed, 395 American aircraft lost, 29, and most of those to operational accidents or anti-aircraft fire, not enemy fighters. The kill ratio was nearly 14-1. But numbers alone didn't tell the full story. Japan had lost something irreplaceable: veteran pilots. Experienced air crews with years of training, impossible to replace given Japan's collapsing training programs and chronic fuel shortages. Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet had launched 473 aircraft that morning. By evening, he had fewer than 100 operational aircraft remaining. Japanese naval aviation had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force. On the Essex, Commander McCampbell addressed his exhausted pilots in the ready room. "Gentlemen, what we accomplished today will be remembered for generations. You didn't just win a battle. You broke the back of Japanese naval air power." Someone in the back asked, "What do we call it, Skipper?" McCampbell smiled grimly. Command is calling it the Battle of the Philippine Sea. But I've heard the deck crews have another name for it. What's that? The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The room erupted in exhausted laughter. The nickname stuck. The disaster of June 19, 1944, was not the result of one factor but many, all converging to create a perfect storm of defeat. 1. Pilot training. By 1944, Japan's pilot training programs had collapsed. Pre-war, Japanese naval aviators underwent rigorous training lasting 2 to 3 years. By 1944, fuel shortages and losses had reduced training to a few months, sometimes only 50 to 100 flight hours before pilots were sent to combat. American pilots, by contrast, received over 300 hours of training, including extensive gunnery practice, formation flying, and combat tactics. 2. Aircraft quality. The Zero was still a formidable aircraft in the hands of an expert, but it had critical weaknesses: no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, fragile construction. The Hellcat was specifically designed to exploit these weaknesses. Moreover, American industrial capacity was producing newer models constantly. Japanese factories, bombed and starved for resources, struggled to build even a few hundred aircraft per month. American factories built thousands. 3. Tactics. Japanese tactics in 1944 were largely unchanged from 1941, tight formations, turning dogfights, reliance on individual pilot skill. American tactics had evolved: Bumanzum attacks, coordinated division tactics, superior fighter direction using radar. 4. Radar and fighter direction. American carriers had sophisticated radar and fighter direction systems. Controllers could track both friendly and enemy aircraft, vectoring interceptors to optimal positions. Japanese carriers had primitive radar and poor coordination. The result was that American fighters always had the advantage of position, altitude, surprise, numbers at the decisive point. 5. Industrial might. Perhaps most important was the sheer weight of American industrial power. When the U.S. lost 29 aircraft on June 19, they were replaced within days. When Japan lost 395 aircraft, they could not replace them, or the pilots, for months, if at all. The mathematics of attrition were brutal and unforgiving. The F-6F Hellcat went on to become the most successful naval fighter of World War II. Final statistics. Total produced: 12, 275 enemy aircraft destroyed, 5, 223 kill ratio, 19:1. 19 enemy aircraft destroyed for every Hellcat lost in combat. The Hellcat served through the end of the war, flying over Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and finally, Tokyo itself. When Japan surrendered aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, it was Hellcats that flew protective cover overhead. The aircraft that had broken Japanese air power at the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot witnessed its final defeat. Numbers can obscure the human reality of war. On June 19, 1944, hundreds of young Japanese pilots died in the Pacific, many of them barely out of their teens, thrown into hopeless battle by commanders who had already lost the war but refused to accept it. Commander David McCampbell, who ended the war as the Navy's top ace with 34 kills, later reflected on the Turkey Shoot with mixed emotions. "We did our job. We protected the fleet. We won the battle. But I never forgot that every aircraft I shot down had a young man inside, someone's son, someone's brother. They fought bravely with what they had. It wasn't their fault their leaders sent them into a meat grinder." The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was a decisive American victory, but it was also a tragedy, a testament to the waste of war, the cost of fanaticism, and the terrible efficiency of modern industrialized combat. June 19, 1944, marked a turning point not just in the Pacific War, but in the history of aerial combat. It proved that technological superiority, combined with superior training and industrial capacity, could overwhelm even the most determined enemy. It demonstrated the importance of doctrine, how tactics and coordination could multiply the effectiveness of superior equipment. Most importantly, it showed that the age of the lone ace, the individual warrior pilot, was ending. Modern air combat was becoming a system: radar, fighter direction, coordinated tactics, mass production, logistics. The nation that mastered the system would dominate the skies. Japan had begun the Pacific War with arguably the world's finest fighter aircraft and its most experienced pilots. But by failing to adapt, by clinging to outdated tactics and unable to replace losses, Japan lost the war in the air. America, by contrast, learned from defeat. The Hellcat was not born from genius but from bitter lessons written in blood at Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, and the Coral Sea. It was the product of listening to frontline pilots, of engineers willing to abandon elegance for effectiveness, of a nation willing to mobilize its industrial might. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot was the culmination of that transformation. 400 Japanese aircraft launched into the Pacific sky on June 19, 1944. Fewer than 50 returned. The age of the Zero was over. The age of American air supremacy had begun. And the Hellcat, that rugged, powerful, unglamorous fighter, had made it possible. Japanese losses: 395 aircraft, 200-plus aircrew killed. American losses: 29 aircraft, fewer than 20 aircrew killed. Kill ratio, approximately 14-1. Japan never recovered its carrier air power. The Marianas fell to American forces within weeks. B-29 bombers began striking the Japanese home islands from captured airfields. The path to Tokyo was open. The war in the Pacific was decided. In the end, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot taught a brutal truth: in modern war, courage alone is not enough. Victory requires the right machines, the right training, the right tactics, and the industrial power to sustain them. Japan had the courage. America had everything else. And on that single day in June 1944, the difference became clear for all the world to see. The sky remembers. The ocean remembers. And history remembers the day 400 planes vanished, and an empire's air power vanished with them.